Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. You know, I was never really a fan of the books or the television show growing up, but the 3D adventures of Nancy Drew PC games were a core part of my childhood. I remember spending countless hours glued to the family computer's monitor, either trying to solve the games myself or watching my older sister play them. I remember absolutely falling in love with this series for its eccentric characters, exotic locations, and all the addictive little mini-games and diversions. It's hard to believe it's been over a decade now since I first played these games. I've been wanting to revisit this series for a while now to see if they're both as good and as difficult as I remember, so I think it's best to start with the first game I ever played. I'm Absolutely Puzzled, and today we're taking a look back at Nancy Drew, Secret of the Old Clock, a first-person point-and-click adventure game released July 12, 2005 for PC. While this was the 12th game in the series, the order you play in is generally not important, particularly this game, which takes place in 1930 as opposed to the typical modern-day setting. Starting a new game gives us the choice of tutorial and junior or senior detective. Now that I'm an adult, I consider myself fairly savvy when it comes to puzzles, so I'll be starting with Senior Detective straight away. Game begins with a first-person cutscene showing Nancy Drew driving to the Lilac Inn. A brief narration read in a period-appropriate radio announcer voice gives us a bit of exposition. So this 17-year-old girl, Emily Crandall, an acquaintance of Nancy through a mutual friend, invites Nancy to the Lilac Inn for an unknown reason, though she sounded upset on the phone. Judging from that cutscene and this initial screenshot, you might think that the game is 3D. It even says so on the box. And it is 3D. Sort of. It's 3D in the same way that Myst is 3D, using pre-rendered images of 3D environments and the occasional pre-rendered cutscene. The illusion of movement and looking around is basically a very complicated PowerPoint presentation. The characters are this pseudo-3D as well, with their animations recorded and pasted onto the backgrounds as 2D sprites. Myst did this because of the hardware limitations of its time, so why is a game released almost 12 years later still using this outdated technique, when fully 3D point-and-click adventure games like Bone, Out from Boneville, and Myst 5 End of Ages were released the same year? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense. You see, Her Interactive was a very small development team that created their own game engine specifically made for this single style of game. They churned out 2 games per year for over 10 years, and with their target audience being young girls that most likely didn't have machines capable of rendering high-quality graphics, it just wasn't logical to spend the time and money to learn a new game engine. I personally don't have a problem with their method. It allows everyone to play the game since they could run on a potato, and the limited movement prevents you from wasting time trying to interact with things you don't need to. I just wish the characters didn't look so dang creepy. Shh! Greeting us inside the inn is...
Well, hello! I'm Jane Willoughby.
She was a friend of Emily's mother Gloria before she passed away, and assumed the role of Emily's guardian at her mother's request. She tells us how forgetful Emily has been lately, and sends us upstairs to talk to her. We go upstairs and meet Emily, who seems a little...
I thought I heard something.
On edge. She's very vague about what's making her so paranoid, but she reveals the reason she called us here is to safeguard her mother's expensive jewelry and store it in Nancy's father's safe. Before we get the chance to take the jewelry...
What was that?
The oven explodes, destroying the entire kitchen. Jane believes Emily may have forgotten to turn off the gas to the stove, and says the insurance company will be reluctant to pay for the damages. She expresses her sympathy for Emily that her mom died less than a month ago, and now the inn might shut down for good. She excuses herself to take a phone call as Emily shouts from her bedroom.
Oh no!
Nancy rushes up the stairs to discover someone stole the jewelry during the commotion caused by the fire. Emily denies leaving the stove on and said she knew this would happen, but won't say why. She tells Nancy about an eccentric old man named Josiah Crowley. She believed Josiah would leave her a large sum of money in his will, but when he died, he left everything he had to an ESP expert named Richard Topham. Nancy makes the mistake of asking if the jewelry was insured because Emily guilt trips her into going to the bank on her behalf to ask the manager, Jim Archer. At this point, the game opens up for exploration and gives us 2 main objectives: figure out who set the kitchen on fire and stole the jewelry, and go on a massive scavenger hunt to recover Josiah Crowley's real will. It's still very linear, but we have a decent amount of tasks to go about completing in whatever order we want, which I liked a lot. Inside the inn, there's a slidey block puzzle you might recognize from every puzzle game ever that rewards you with a mirror. You can also pay 5 cents to play this keen little analog arcade game, Bard Bounce. I decided to explore the outside of the inn before I see what the rest of the town has to offer. Walking the path behind the inn lets us find a receipt for an appraisal for a key. The path also led me to rediscover my fondest memory of this game.
Oh, a miniature golf course. Swell.
I remember playing this minigame so many times as a kid, so let's pay the 10-cent entry fee and see if it's as fun as I remember. It's not. It's terrible. This is the worst mini-golf game I've ever played, and hopefully ever will. The ball accelerates like a freaking bullet, but grinds to a halt the second it starts to lose momentum. If trying to calculate the exact amount of force to use wasn't difficult enough already, when you want to hit the ball decently hard, the game won't let you since you can only reach as far back as the borders of the game window. Also, why is one of the most complex animations in the entire game a golf ball traveling through a mine shaft? If you do manage to beat the course's par, you're rewarded with a toy pony. There's also a Wordle-esque pattern guessing game, with the reward being a poem that's probably going to be a solution for a puzzle later on. Continuing down the path, we reach the house and school of the aforementioned Richard Topham. Trying to talk with Richard is equally hilarious and incredibly annoying. He's a condescending, narcissistic con man with this droning, exaggerated voice.
Have you ever focused sunlight through a magnifying glass until it was a minute yet searing point of light, Miss Drew?
Yeah, I guess.
He's become so invested in his school for the paranormal scam, he seems to actually believe he's a telekinetic psychic. He won't even continue the conversation with you until you complete his puzzles and prove you're not too stupid to talk to him. Richard's easily my favorite character in the game. The way he constantly insults and talks down to us is just too ridiculous not to enjoy. Also, he's got this weird looking cat.
Hey, don't f***ing look at me like that. That's a weird looking f***ing cat.
Richard tells us he met Josiah about a year ago in the Lilac Inn, and Josiah was so interested in his teachings that he invited him to live in his house and start a school. You've probably been noticing these dialogue boxes during conversations. Typically, we'll be given a series of questions to ask, then the conversation ends. But occasionally, we'll be given a choice of what we say, and depending on our choice, the character we're speaking to can say slightly different things. Unfortunately, none of this matters. Whether we act nice or sarcastic, whether we accuse people directly or beat around the bush, the game is still going to unfold the same way every single time. Don't get me wrong though, the fully voice-acted dialogue is very entertaining to listen to. The soundtrack is great too. It's a lot of upbeat, jazzy songs I really enjoyed. The problem I had with the music is if you don't finish whatever you're doing before the song ends, you'll be left in silence until you do the next thing that causes the song to play. Back at Topham's house, among the series of curiosities to interact with, we can play Memory Match to find another mirror, along with finding Josiah's notebook, which gives us clues to open the shed outside the house. What are you when you win Bard Bounce? Keen. What poet is the cat's meow? Omar. What will par on my miniature golf course get you? Pony. What's Gloria's middle name? Lois. Open Sesame. Or should I say, Open Sesame. There's not much in the shed at the moment besides a clock and a guide on the local fish population. In order to access the attic, we must find 4 mirrors to direct a beam of sunlight onto a sensor. We've already found the first 2, and the third mirror is inside the clock on the workbench that utilizes that poem we got from the golf puzzle. The 4th mirror is nowhere in sight, so we have to move on for the time being. Before we hit the town, let's follow Emily's advice and
Don't forget to call your father.
we pay 5 cents at the coin phone and speak with Carson Drew. He gives us some driving advice and asks us to pick up a package for him at the telegraph office. There's not much left here to do, so let's finally get behind the wheel. The driving is a lot like the old Micro Machine games with its top-down perspective. Driving is simple enough, use either the mouse or arrow keys to move and press the spacebar near buildings to park. You have to look out for potholes or risk getting a flat tire, and keep an eye on your fuel gauge and refuel as necessary. It all works well enough, aside from a bit of lag and the corners being a little wonky. The fuel gauge and potholes make driving a bit of a resource management puzzle instead of just a means to switch locations. Our first stop is Waddell Jewelry to learn about the key that got appraised. The jeweler complains that Jim Archer had the key appraised, and when he discovered it wasn't worth anything, refused to pay the jeweler the appraisal fee. Paying $1.50 lets us keep the key for ourselves. Our next stop is Jim Archer's bank, where Jim tells Nancy that Emily's jewelry is unfortunately not insured. They get to talking about the impending depression, but Jim assures Nancy that the bank is doing fine, although he's clearly lying. Nancy can ask Jim why his car was parked in front of the Lilac Inn shortly before the fire, but he'll deny being there, stating it's a very popular make and color car. They talk a bit about the possibility of another will existing, as Jim was also expecting some of Josiah's possessions, but Jim is doubtful. The only thing Josiah left him in his will is an old typewriter. Reading the typewriter's ribbon shows a note from Josiah to a Mrs. Sheldon at Twin Elms, saying he let Mrs. Sheldon borrow his trivet. Also inside his office is a clock Josiah gave to him while he was still alive. The first 3 mirrors were hidden inside clocks, so I bet the final mirror is what's behind this lock, and I bet the key is the one we purchased from the jeweler. Continuing on, we reach Tubby Telegrams to pick up the package for Nancy's father. Mr. Tubby offers us a job delivering telegrams to earn some extra money. I keep mentioning money, but I guess I haven't really talked about it yet. This was the first Nancy Drew game with a money management mechanic, and it's implemented throughout the entire game. From mini golf, the payphone, gas, and spare tires, there's a good amount of things to spend money on. We start with a generous $3.50, and we can sometimes find money lying around, but the main way to earn money is by delivering telegrams. Each telegram earns us 25 cents, but a lot of that money goes right back into buying gas, because Nancy's blue Roadster has the fuel economy of a Lamborghini. Also, Mr. Tubby gives us false hope that customers might tip, but I must have delivered about 20 telegrams and never received a single tip.
He rarely tips, and I never do.
That's okay. Bye.
If you refuel or get your spare tire fixed while not having enough money to pay, the game will end with Nancy going to federal prison for theft. Is what I wish would happen. Instead, the game sends you to bolt sorting purgatory to pay off your debt. So many of these parts look nearly identical, and a single mistake resets your progress. As terrible as it is, I can actually appreciate this. The developers found a way to legitimately punish players for not properly managing their money. Did I get the impression the money management mechanic was implemented to artificially extend the length because the rest of the game is quite short? Kinda. Did I still enjoy it even though I'm old enough to realize this? Kinda. Have you noticed how low the resolution is yet? If you don't know, a standard high-definition display is 1920 by 1080 pixels, but this entire game window is only 600 by 480 pixels. If you don't adjust your display, the game takes up less than a quarter of the screen. For just how low the resolution is, I'm pretty impressed with how sharp the images are. Now it's time to clear the only section of the game more annoying than trying to par in mini-golf, getting Josiah's trivet. At Twin Elms, Mrs. Sheldon won't give us the trivet unless we get her bridge cards from Mrs. Chakowski at her house, but Mrs. Chakowski won't give us the cards until we get her raffle tickets from the orphanage, but Mrs. O'Shea at the orphanage won't give us the raffle tickets unless we give her 5 toys. This in itself is another money management problem. Do you spend 50 cents and win 5 ponies from mini golf? Or do you spend $1.25 for 5 toys at the general store? I think you know what I chose to do. After giving the toys to Mrs. O'Shea, she tells us that she doesn't even have the tickets, and we have to pick them up from the print shop, but Mr. Phelps at the print shop won't give you the tickets until you catch a 19-inch largemouth bass, which luckily we know how to catch one because we saw the pamphlet in the shed. So basically, we talk to Sheldon to talk to Chakowski, to talk to O'Shea, to get 5 toys, to give 5 toys, to talk to Phelps, to catch the fish, to give the fish, to get the tickets, to give the tickets, to get the cards, to give the cards, to get the trivet. And with this ridiculous fetch quest finished, it's time to return to the Lilac Inn. Placing the 4 mirrors in the shed reveals a very satisfying animation of the attic opening. And here it is, the old clock with the secret. So what is the clock's secret and the secret of the old clock? Well, it's no cakewalk as we're blocked by the clock's lock, with the secrets behind a puzzle involving Shakespearean sayings and hobo hieroglyphs that we don't have the means to solve right now. On the clock is a note that states the last will and testament is hidden inside Marcel. There's also a ham radio, but it won't work without the quartz crystal Josiah ordered. Richard has the crystal, but he won't give it to you until you help him prove he's telepathic by guessing the card he has in his hand 5 times in a row. At first I thought the solution would be to position a mirror or something to see his hand, but Nancy gave me the solution before I was able to figure it out for myself.
Oh my gosh. Whenever he picks up a particular card, he always says the same thing.
Richard has 10 questions he can ask, with each question pertaining to a specific card, and 2 questions per card. You pretty much have to write down every question and use the process of elimination, which, depending on your luck, can take a while. I feel like this puzzle would have been a lot better if there was only a single question per card, and didn't have Nancy giving you clues. Now that we've proved he's telepathic, the crystal is ours. Nancy asks him who Marcel is, and Richard explains that Marcel is not a who, but a what. Marcel was Josiah's hat that's now in Emily's possession. When we return to the Lilac Inn, Jane tells us there's been more trouble. Emily swears that the painting in her room moved, and recently she's been hearing strange sounds and whispers. Nancy offers to stay and try to solve the mystery herself.
I'd like to try to figure out what happened to that jewelry.
What are you? Some kind of Sam Spade?
Emily lets us look at Marcel, which holds a safety deposit box key, but Jim Archer won't let us open the box unless we sew a dress for his wife. He finally admits that the bank is on the brink of ruin, which is why he can't afford a seamstress. The sewing machine in Emily's room is missing the needle, but Jane won't give it to us until we organize some pies for her. I really like this puzzle, but I just can't get past the way these pies look. The blueberry looks fine enough, I guess, but the chocolate looks like a mushroom, and the cherry looks like the love child of a pepperoni pizza and a skin graft. Blech! With Jane still looking for the needle, we get the opportunity to snoop the inside of her podium. We find a photo showing 2 men in a tunnel under the house. Nancy opens the entrance and discovers a tunnel connecting the inn to Richard Topham's house. There's a crawl space that leads to the wall behind Emily's room, meaning that the falling books, moving paintings, and whispering voices have all been done by someone inside the wall. Nancy confronts Jane about the photo and the tunnel, but Jane denies knowing anything about it, of course. But at least we have the sewing needle now. Sewing wasn't as bad as I remembered it being, most likely because I'm a pro gamer now, but I still didn't care for this puzzle. With the dress completed, Jim lets us try our key in the safety deposit box. The key works, but there's no will inside, only a journal. The journal is locked, but by listening to a record to hear a series of sounds and using the trivet to translate the sounds into letters, we can open the journal. The journal gives us 3 radio frequencies to speak with 3 other radio operators Josiah referred to as Flute, Pyramus, and Thisbe. Each operator has a phrase to give you, but will only tell you if given the correct challenge phrase. Richard Topham refuses to let you borrow the book containing the phrases, so Nancy uses the tunnel and steals it. If you accidentally make any noise while stealing the book, you'll be greeted with one of the most terrifying game over cutscenes I've ever seen. Richard wraps around the doorframe before towering over you in his most threatening Superman pose while staring at nothing as ominous yellow lights flicker behind him. This is one of the few ways you can actually fail the game. It's not a big deal though, since we can simply use the second chance option on the main menu to try again. We give Flute, Pyramus, and Thisbe the correct challenge phrases, get their 3 phrases, use the newspaper in the inn to translate the phrases into symbols, and enter the symbols on the clock. This wild goose chase of finding the will is finally coming to a close, so what's going to be the big, grand, final puzzle to complete our journey? It's Candyland. We get a golden golf ball, hit a hole-in-one, and win another safety deposit box key. While walking to our car, we overhear Emily yelling at Jane that there's something wrong with her. Emily tells Nancy that she took a nap and woke up holding one of the stolen pieces of jewelry. Nancy tries to explain what's actually happening, but Emily's convinced she's having a nervous breakdown and tells Nancy to leave. We return to the bank and Jim lets us open the other safety deposit box. And here it is, the real will. Let's see who actually inherited Josiah's money. Or not, Nancy, we can look at this old photo instead if you want. It's Emily's mother and Jane, except Jane looks nothing like the Jane we know. We head to the inn to confront this Jane imposter, but she's leaving as we're pulling in, resulting in a car chase all throughout town. Nancy cuts Jane off as she crashes into the pie truck.
Why couldn't you just mind your own business?
The game ends with a letter to Nancy's boyfriend, Ned Nickerson. Nancy explains that a woman named Marion Arbor, who lived in a boarding house with the real Jane, intercepted the letter from Emily to Jane asking her to be her guardian. Marion devised a plan to pretend to be Jane in order to steal the jewelry and scare Emily into selling the inn. I guess the stove blowing up wasn't the only gaslighting going on at the inn. The will was confirmed to be authentic as well, implying Richard Topham forged the other will, although he denies this. Josiah actually left all of his money to Emily Crandall and Jim Archer, leaving Topham with nothing. We get the displeasure of seeing the disgusting cherry pie again before a teaser for the next game plays and the credits roll. I don't know whether it was bad writing or Nancy just being new at detective work, but Jane is such an obvious villain. She's the only person who stands to profit from Emily selling the inn. She tells the police that Emily shouldn't be taken seriously. She has the photo of the tunnel inside of her podium, but denies knowing about it. She refuses to sew for you because she's not actually a dressmaker, and Nancy finds a note from Jane to Gloria mentioning Marion stealing from her purse. Even Jane thinks she did it.
You know what? I'll bet it's me.
I feel like the only reason Jim Archer's car was at the inn, and the only reason the tunnel connects the inn to Richard Topham's house, was to make them both seem like possible suspects in order to make Jane not seem so obvious. So, was the game both as good and as difficult as I remember? Well, no, honestly. I did enjoy the setting, characters, and music, but a lot of the puzzles were tedious or repetitive, and running everybody's errands got pretty annoying. As far as the difficulty goes, I never got seriously stuck like I did when I was younger, but I wouldn't call the game easy. It requires you to pay attention to little details, and encourages note-taking. Two things that little me obviously sucked at. I did wonder what the difference between Junior and Senior Detective was, so I replayed the beginning of the game in Junior. It simplified the block puzzle, increased the par for mini-golf, and gave me a checklist in case I forgot what I needed to do. It's the same game, just slightly easier where it can be. It's not the best game in the series, but it's far from the worst. Would I recommend this be the first game you play? Well, it got me interested enough to play most of the other games, so sure. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by leaving a like, comment, and subscribing to be Absolutely Puzzled. But until next time...
It's been swell knowing you, sister!